Okay, well, today we're going to talk about trait unification um, for sex offenders, juvenile sex offenders, and this is just one cluster of traits that are commonly found among juvenile sex offenders, and also specifically sex offenders that have chosen younger targets um, as their victims. So basically, when you open up their profiles, you're going to get a list of traits. The most commonly cited statistically are are the ones listed here, and it is kind of hard to discern how these all these traits connect up to a singular dysfunction. Right now that they're listed, you've got a list of 5 or 10. You can get all kinds of diagnosis, but when you test them across the board, there are patterns that will emerge, um, and it's kind of challenging to kind of piece that all together at this point. Right now, that they're kind of presented as separate disorders when I'm going to suggest today that there's a common underlying dysfunction underlying all these issues here. So what just as a parallel, just to kind of give a point of reference, let's look at body science as opposed to mind science. Body science is a little bit, I would consider actually much further along in its maturity at this point than mind science is. But when you look at the symptomology versus the disease for cancer, for example, take the cancer label out of it, and you have a list of seemingly unconnected symptoms: persistent cough, blood in the stools, swollen glands, unexplained anemia, change in bowel habits, change in urination. These are different symptoms, but the common underlying disease is the cancer. You treat the cancer, or you cut off the tumor, and the symptomology, the various third and fourth order uh, symptomology disappears. And so I'm going to suggest that a similar dynamic is occurring in the mind. Uh, the central core dysfunction is the weak psychological boundary, um, and it's going to trigger directly over time um, all of these related symptoms. So when you just look at them in the you can kind of see that they seem to be related. Overly passive, depression, poor social skills, overly passive. You can see how these kind of come together in the same person. And what I'm going to suggest is that that the core underlying connecting feature is the weak boundary that triggers everything else. So let's kind of go over that. I'm going to review that again. So this is a healthy psychological boundary, and I discussed this in another presentation, but let me just kind of review it here. So this is a psychological boundary working. Um, this is a healthy one, rejecting bad deals, rejecting environmental negativity, um, absorbing positive deals, good deals, and this functions just like a psychological cell. That's like the cell of the human body, absorbing nutrients, blocking waste, eliminating waste, um, producing nutrients. This is what the theory suggests is it's a parallel system, and these systems occur all the time in nature. This is four basic elements of a healthy functioning system. So, and this is basically the reverse of a healthy system, and it can be triggered by abuse, neglect, or overprotection. And this is the abuse element that's well proven out, but everything else is still theory at this point. But this is the opposite of a healthy cell working. So the basic skills that they lack are can't be open to nutrients or good things, positive things from the environment. Can't block the negativity from the environment. can't hang on to his own positive thoughts, positive ideas, can't eliminate wasteful thoughts, wasteful ideas, emotions effectively. So this system is entirely malfunctioning. We're arguing. Uh, when you get that basic malfunctioning, everything else can branch out from it. So ADHD, dependent behavior, poor social skill, burial failure, low self-esteem, passivity, depression, all connected to weak boundaries, but how? So I'm going to just kind of plow through all this and discuss how generally these can be related. So, weak boundary issues, passivity. This is when negativity just passes right through the system. Um, like a waiter is rude to you, and you paid lots of money, let's assume, and they give you cold food, and you just kind of take it, and you're a pushover. This is dysfunctional passivity, overly passive. Um, so, as opposed to assertive person who would say, hey, I paid good money, I want you to cook this food. An overly passive person is just going to take it and roll over and take it. The dependent personality, a lot of the sex offenders will test positive or high on the dependent personality trait. I personally don't think that this is a trait that they're born with. I think if you look closely enough, you're going to see that dependence was fostered by the environment, contributed by the mother not allowing healthy self-development. So if the child accepts the mother's overprotective behavior that she's been displaying since birth on some occasions, if they accept it, then she's going to foster dependence. That's a trait that she's going to encourage and he's going to absorb. So weak psychological boundary, when your system is entirely compromised, when your predominant emotion is negativity, can't eliminate your own negativity, can't attract negativity, attract bullying from your environment. When this becomes your predominant state, you're gonna see that you're gonna think that I'm a failure. Okay, let's move on to fear of failure. So when you look at fear of failure, because he's so vulnerable to his environment and also his own negativity, his own emotions. Every failure is a catastrophe. Either the overprotection or the abuse situation. Anytime something doesn't go right exactly as planned, because of overprotection, he doesn't have the recuperative skills, and if he's in an abusive environment, if he adopts the same self-talk that usually the father gives to him, then every failure is going to feel emotionally like a catastrophe. So when you have a miniature crisis every time things don't work out, what you're going to have is fear of failure because you're afraid legitimately because you can't adapt to that failure. This entire dynamic, they're going to test, poor self-management. This entire dynamic of not being able to have the four basic elements of a healthy psychological boundary misfunctioning, that's poor self-management. That's just another label for everything else we've been talking about. Let's see, poor social skills, I didn't add that one in. Basically, when you have a preponderance of system negativity, you're kind of developmentally frozen. So you're not growing. You have a fear of failure, so you don't try new things. You don't learn, and you're going to develop poor social skills just because lack of experience and so much negativity. So how can it possibly lead to ADHD? Well, think about it. What is ADHD? You can't focus on one thing at a time. Can't be patient. Well, why is this? Well, one could be if you look at overprotective mother. Assume you had a servant. Look at a rich person who used to be waited on all the time, and ask them, see what happens when they have to wait for something. They get very testy. They get very impatient. So what I would argue is that when you have that type of parenting, they're going to be adopt similar types of behaviors as the very impatient, very unable to look further into the future for the way to get their needs met. Abuse, I would argue, could also trigger ADHD. I'm not sure if this is established in the research yet, but I would suggest that if it's consistently triggered the fight or flight mechanism, it's always going to be go, go, go as far as what you consider to be you know, your expectations for a situation. It's going to be a high stress situation, and you're going to want things done, immediately. So that could also trigger or test positive for ADHD. So what you can say is all these traits can be traced back to a singular point of failure, the weak psychological boundary. Again, and that singular point of failure can also be traced back to the family environment: abuse, overprotection, and neglect. Three common features found in sex offense histories, case histories. So, and to conclude, just a general conclusion: more research is needed uh, to establish these claims more further. But if it is true, then we have a clear picture of causation for what went wrong, and also how to fix it and how to prevent it. Weak boundary issues could be the core dynamic triggering many other problems. This theory also supports the notion that's really common in the field that home life of juvenile offenders is important for understanding how these offense behaviors got triggered. This is not about excuses or self-pity. That's not very helpful. That's going to contribute to future offense or stagnation. What this is about is exploration and insight and recovery. When you understand the problem more thoroughly, when you understand the cause of the problem, you can understand the solution and you can understand how to get over it. This is only one major dysfunctional undercurrent at work, but it is the majority, the the majority of them. The research suggests these traits are consistent in 40 to 70%, which is consistent with the weak boundary symptomology. But this dynamic will tend to be at work with the SOs who have young victims. So again, in the future, we're going to suggest look into this pattern more clearly, suggest how specifically these traits dynamic can lead to offense behavior, and also how to, on the more positive, how to treat it, how to recover from it. All that's going to be in the future. Thanks for listening.